Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, a bittersweet welcome to the United Arab Emirates as hundreds of Israelis are held up upon arrival in Dubai. Meanwhile, at home, Israeli health ministry officials are warning of a third nationwide lockdown as COVID infection rates remain high. And finally, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Space IL teasing its second historic attempt at landing on the moon. Armed with assurances from the airlines and from United Arab Emirates foreign ministry authorities, thousands of Israelis are taking advantage of the new opportunities afforded to them through the Abraham Accords. But a whole flight full of Israelis were received Monday morning with a less than expected welcome when airport officials denied them entry into the country.
מה שאתם רואים פה עכשיו זה ביזיון מוחלט. אנחנו נמצאים פה בשדה התעופה כבר למעלה משעתיים. כמו שאתם רואים, תסתכל, תראה להם פה את כל האנשים. אנחנו נמצאים פה למעלה משעתיים. יש פה ילדים, יש פה תינוקות, יש פה אנשים אחרי לילה בלי שינה. ובעצם אחרי כל מאות השקלים והדולרים שבעצם השקענו פה והבטיחו לנו שהכל מסודר, היינו עם פליי דוביי בקשר בשבוע האחרון באופן רציף. בכל זאת, מה שהם עשו זה בעצם סוג של הונאה, כי הם לא מגיעים לפה, אין לנו עם מי לדבר. דרכונים זרים, כמו שאתם רואים, כבר לא נמצאים פה, וכל מי שאתם רואים פה זה רק ישראלים, אז חבל מאוד שזה מה שקורה.
Over 160 Israeli passengers, men, women, and children, on Fly Dubai flight FZ1628 were greeted with an unfortunate surprise upon arrival in Dubai early Monday morning. The Israelis being refused entry into the country and held for hours at the airport while their non-Israeli co-passengers were admitted. Well, Israeli Foreign Ministry officials explained that apparently the delay was due to a misunderstanding in visa application requirements and that all the Israeli visitors would eventually be allowed into the country after electronically filling out the correct forms. Still, at least 2 other flights due to depart Monday morning were delayed, awaiting a solution to the issue. And meanwhile, a Fly Dubai spokesperson apologizing for the incident, stating that they are reviewing the reasons behind the entry delay, that they fully understand that this was inconvenient for passengers, and that this is not the standard of service that they expect of themselves, promising to rectify the issue ahead of subsequent flights. Israel CEO Uri Sirkis likewise saying that problems with Israeli entry visas only began on Sunday and are being worked out. Direct flight agreements between Israel and the UAE have only recently been finalized, and in the few weeks since agreements were signed, these are the first such issues reported.
Moving on, bad news turning for the worse. Public compliance with government coronavirus restrictions dropping more and more by the day, as the Israeli COVID cabinet now weighs a third round of national closures. Nittany Manson with the details.
A coronavirus infection rate continuing to balloon in Israel for the third time. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again reiterating Sunday evening Israeli efforts at securing the health of the public, and primarily through the dispersal of upwards of 6 million vaccines from companies Moderna and Pfizer.
אני אמשיך להוביל את המדיניות שקבענו מתחילת המשבר, כמה שיותר מתחילת פיתוח החיסונים, כמה שיותר חיסונים, כמה שיותר מקורות, לכמה שיותר אזרחים וכמה שיותר מהר. אנחנו נערכים למבצע לוגיסטי אדיר של קליטת החיסונים, שימורם וחלוקתם לאזרחי ישראל. אני חושב שהיום אפשר לומר בבטחה, ניתן לראות את האור בקצה המגפה, אבל עד אז, אני אחזור ואומר את זה, על כולנו להמשיך להישמע להנחיות. זה מרחק, ידיים, מסכות, ולצערי, כנראה שזה לא קורה, כפי שהיינו רוצים שזה יקרה, כי בימים האחרונים אנחנו רואים עלייה תלולה ומדאיגה בתחלואה.
For 3 days in a row, Israeli COVID infection rates remaining at above 3%, nearly 4%. Over 2,600 more Israelis confirmed as carrying COVID-19 since yesterday. That's over 13,000 currently infected. Then with at least 342 in serious condition, and the death toll now at 2,917. Meanwhile, green city after green city falling back into yellow status or worse. Health Ministry officials warning of yet another nationwide lockdown if the situation can't be wrangled under control. Health Minister Yuli Edelstein urging the government to adopt closures for all non-essential stores and all schools in medium and high infection areas as soon as possible. And this in addition to possibly reimposing quarantine restrictions for all incoming international arrivals, including those from so-called green countries. Still, Sunday night's COVID cabinet meeting ending without any major changes, the committee instead passing a proposal to resume their meetings Monday, while extending the pilot opening of malls, markets, and museums by 48 hours or until midnight Tuesday. Then, dozens of other stores also willfully disobeying coronavirus restrictions, most notably IKEA, as they intentionally brave more fines and police intervention in announcing plans to reopen in limited format.
Now, speaking of coronavirus, the Israeli COVID task force says that the daily caseload has already doubled in the past 2 weeks, with trends suggesting that the rate will double again in 2 weeks from now. So when will the vaccines finally be rolled out, and who will get them first? Joining me with more is Professor Manfred Green, Director for the Masters in Public Health program at the University of Haifa. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Now, first, I understand that you can't tell us exactly what the plan is as it relates to who gets the vaccines and in what order, but can you tell us about the decision-making process itself? How do you decide the order of vaccine recipients?
Okay, there's several committees that deal with this issue, and as I mentioned, I'm on a couple of these committees. The whole idea really is to decide whether you want to get people vaccinated who are spreading the disease, or you want to get people vaccinated who are at high risk. In other words, which do you vaccinate first? And so this is really a debate. And I think that in this way, I think publicly, from a point of view of the public, I think the public would prefer to see those at high risk being vaccinated first. And so that will, and I think it makes sense also professionally, because it really doesn't make too much difference which way you go. So that probably will be one of the first groups. And then the healthcare, and those who are caring for it, particularly in care homes, in elderly people's homes, that the people who are caring for them should be vaccinated.
So those at the highest risk group and those so those in the high risk groups, like the elderly and the infirm and with compromised immune systems, and then those most in contact with the virus, like healthcare workers. Those are who you suspect will be first. That
would be the second group, yeah. And I think those vaccinating healthcare workers is really to prevent absenteeism and not, making sure we have a full workforce, a healthcare workforce.
Well, in what way can the government, or will the government, be pushing and promoting the vaccine? Because obviously you need public participation for it to work in the first place.
Right. In a sense, I'm not too concerned about the pace at which that vaccination program will go. Even if you use a figure that we've looked at, that only about 25% of the public have said that they would be prepared to be the first to get the vaccine, that's still a lot of people. If you take 25% of the adult population, then we're well over 1 million people and somewhat more than that. So if they are the people who are going to go first, we'll be vaccinating a lot of people. And then I guess after that, you'll see that the acceptance rate of the vaccine will increase, and also the logistics will be improved. But it'll take several months. There's no doubt that this is not going to be a very rapid process.
Well, and especially, of course, with the fears of the potential long-term effects being unknown. Is that something that you think is going to prevent? Is that something that you think is going to prevent participation, or to a minor degree?
I've been working in vaccines for so many years, and I've not only received regular vaccines. As a participant, I've been in vaccine trials. So I'm not very concerned about that. Vaccines go through a very thorough evaluation before they're released to the public, even before they're released for trials. So even when they're given to people who go into the trial, they've already been very thoroughly investigated for any possible side effect. And then you see some of the side effects early on. So there's nothing really biologically that we are particularly concerned about with these vaccines. Obviously, we need to monitor this very carefully, and that will be done. But I would say that we're pretty confident. All of them are using technology that is actually well known, although they're not necessarily being used routinely, but they're all well-known technologies.
All right, now, final point, the head of the public health services at the Israeli Health Ministry is saying that obviously the exit strategy cannot rely solely on vaccines. Are you agreeing with this point? And if so, what else is it taking?
The answer is obviously too simple even to say it, but I'll say it anyway. We need collaboration and cooperation of the public. And, the simple process of using masks and social distancing or physical distancing are very, very effective. I'll give you just one quick example. We are virtually not seeing any other respiratory viruses, shall I say many of them, like flu, influenza, and so on. And one of the reasons is that these measures that we take with social distancing and masking and not crowding are actually very effective in preventing the spread of viral diseases, respiratory viral disease. So I think that if this is done together with the vaccines, we'll get there.
All right. Dr. Manfred Green, thank you so much. Professor Manfred Green, thank you.
Thank you very much.
In other news, in spite of mounting issues caused primarily by the pandemic, Israeli alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz and Finance Minister Israel Katz have again failed to come to an agreement on the national budget, thus bringing Israel one step closer to another round of elections, the fourth round in 2 years' time. Gantz warning again that elections will be a certainty if the Prime Minister's and Finance Minister's Likud party cannot agree in the next few days to pass a 2-year budget for 2020 and 2021, and this as stipulated in their Unity Coalition agreement. Then Gantz adding in a Facebook post that while he doesn't believe elections are right for the country at this time, they are preferable to the paralysis of government. Prime Minister Netanyahu, on the other hand, repeating calls for unity, while Finance Minister Katz criticizes Gantz and his blue and white party for playing politics, arguing instead to pass the 2020 budget now and the 2021 budget early next year. Well, at any rate, assuming the Knesset doesn't vote to dissolve before then, the government has until December 23rd to pass a 2020 budget, or else the coalition will be automatically broken up and elections will be set for March of 2021. On a related note, on top of the costs of the pandemic and the closures and the failure to approve a national budget, another election could cost Israel upwards of 3 billion shekels. Meanwhile, roughly 1 million Israelis are still out of work and bills are coming due, with practically no meaningful reprieve or help from government or bank authorities. With me to discuss is consumer behavior expert Dr. Vili Abraham. Vili, thanks so much for being with us. Now, let's start with bills coming due. I understand that the banks of Israel have a new initiative planned. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, the Bank of Israel has a new initiative which emerged out of a concern that people will not be able to return their loans in the long run. And what they want to do is, if a family has earned up to 20,000 shekels in February 2020, then they should pay back 25 to 75% of their loan or mortgage. So they want people to start paying something back.
Well, but realistically, where does that leave people? Because that, at the end of the day, that's not a lot of money.
Well, if you look at most of the people who are unemployed, these are low-skilled workers, people who don't earn lots of money. And it means that for those families, even returning 25% of a mortgage, which can be somewhere between 750 and 1,000 shekels, can make a big difference. And I'm not sure that many of those families will be able to repay so much money. And this can be a serious danger to banks, which may not get their, the money back, which they've given out to loaners.
So is there any sort of better or more affordable plan that you could think of?
Well, what we need to do is we need to think of how to bring people back to work and look at what other countries have done in order to keep the economy working. I think that opening only 50 malls across the country is not a good solution. I think we have to open more malls, but we have to enforce social distancing. And I think that if we do that, we can bring more people back to work and get the economy going. That's the only solution. The only solution is to get people back to work, to make money, and to be able to repay their loans. Otherwise, they won't be able to do it. They'll default, unfortunately.
All right. Well, while all of this is happening, of course, Israel is on the brink of a fourth election, the fourth one in 2 years, and it's estimated to cost upwards of 3 billion more shekels, as we said earlier. And we still don't even have a budget for 2020 or 2021. We've been running on partial budgets since several years ago. How can we pay for that?
Well, the only solution now is to increase the budget deficit, which is, as it is, 13% of the gross domestic product, which is very, very high. So they will have to increase it. If you look at what happened in previous years, Election day was a holiday and people went out to spend. For example, in 2019, in September, people spent about 1.1 billion shekels in using credit cards. We're not talking about cash. So because people spend so much money, it offset the cost of the elections. But elections are very, very expensive. Now they'll be more expensive than prior to COVID-19 because you need to have more more schools where people will be able to come and, and decide who they want to elect. So you need more people, greater budget, and we might need 2 election days because of the social distancing that we want to keep to.
So how does that affect elections? Or rather, how would elections affect the banks and average Israelis in the short and the long term?
Well, if we look at the stock markets, for example, it depends on who investors think will be the next prime minister. And if there's optimism, they'll, bring stocks up. And if there's pessimism, because they don't think anything will change and business is not going to get better, then the stocks will be hurt significantly by this. So it really depends on what they think or who they think will be the next prime minister, and whether they think there'll be any changes in policy.
Well, I guess we have no choice but to wait and see. Dr. Vili Abraham, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, just in time for potential elections, it turns out that Prime Minister Netanyahu may not be as preoccupied with his criminal trials this January as once assumed. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
Court authorities may be ignoring calls to outright dismiss the criminal charges against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But in a move that may delay his trial by several months or longer, it seems judges may at least soon order prosecutors to explain why several sections of their original indictment lack sufficient details, and go back to the drawing board before refiling their indictments in the future. Well, in fact, for months, the Premier's legal team members have been arguing that investigators carried out extremely improper and grave investigative malpractices, in addition to pressuring and threatening witnesses into changing their testimony or simply ignoring testimony that contradicted the claims in the indictment. But more importantly, defensive counsel states that potentially exonerating context was also intentionally withheld from the indictments and charge sheets. And Jerusalem court justices Oded Shacham and Moshe Bar'am have so far been the first to accept these latest arguments, saying the lack of breakdown of the charges requires an explanation.
Now tonight, a landmark, potentially precedent-setting decision comes before the United States Supreme Court. The SCOTUS is set to begin hearing 2 Holocaust restitution-related cases in an argument in which there was 0 direct American involvement. Well, joining me now with more is Abrahamic Business Circle advisor and United States-Israel International Human Rights attorney, Joy Malka Rothenberg. Thank you so much for being with us, Joy.
Thank you.
All right, now I understand that you're representing one of the plaintiffs in these 2 cases. What is the basic outline of your argument without maybe giving away too much, and in what way is the United States involved?
Well, today is a very exciting day as the United States Supreme Court will decide if victims of anti-Semitic persecution can sue Germany and Hungary for World War II era crimes. The oral arguments will be aired live today from the U.S. Supreme Court on C-SPAN. Our basic argument stems from the Talmudic directive, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof. No matter how long, how hard, and no matter how many obstacles that we encounter, we need to pursue justice on behalf of victims of terror who suffered due to genocide, crimes against humanity, and the unlawful confiscation of property in accordance with international law. Later today, actually, the United States Supreme Court will decide whether the U.S. courts can make rulings about these crimes that occurred outside of U.S. borders. Usually, foreign governments cannot be sued in U.S. courts except under certain circumstances, such as acts of terror or acts of property confiscation, which violate international law.
And you're very confident that, that your case falls under those specifications?
Absolutely confident. Ordinarily, Germany and Hungary and the Hungarian Railroad are sovereign entities which are immune from jurisdiction in U.S. courts. But the statutory exemption to the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act opens the door for lawsuits when properties have been taken in violation of international law. With regard to Hungary, between May 14th and July 18th in 1944, over 430,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 48 trains. Most of them were gassed to death. It is estimated that 450,000 of Hungary's Jewish population were exterminated. All of their property, all of their bank accounts, all of their real estate, all of their gold was unlawfully stolen by the Hungarian government.
Well, so how are you then, again, I mean, you mentioned a certain law that would allow the United States to try cases from abroad, you know, foreign entities in which the United States is not really involved, you know, but so this is the first, you know, instance of that law really being used, or are there other cases that are sort of similar and lead the way for yours?
Well, the United States has been a beacon of light in allowing for Holocaust litigation. We have won against Germany. We have won against Austria. We have won against banks which illegally confiscated bank accounts. We have won against insurance company which engaged in the unlawful taking of insurance policies. We've won against companies such as Volkswagen, which utilized slave labor during the Holocaust as part of genocidal crimes. And the United States has opened its doors in an increasing manner to allow for Holocaust litigation of this kind in U.S. soil.
All right, well, now let's assume then that the Supreme Court is going to accept this case and that they try this case and that they find in favor of the defendants, or I'm sorry, of the plaintiffs, of your clients. You know, how do you then go about getting restitution and actually getting some of that, you know, some of those damages from the guilty parties when this is tried in the United States, which, as we've established, isn't related to the case?
So because these cases are of a sort of legal political nature, the way they are resolved is by settlement. The United States government will intervene with the Hungarian government, and there will be a settlement which will hopefully go out to all Hungarian Holocaust survivors anywhere around the world who have suffered as a result of the genocidal taking of property by the Republic of Hungary and the Hungarian railroads.
Wow, incredible. All right, well, Joy, good luck today at the Supreme Court, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And finally, our last story tonight is literally out of this world. Space IL, the legendary independent group behind Israel's failed attempt to land a spacecraft on the moon last year, is back at it again. The company taking to Twitter on Monday morning to tease their second landing attempt. And the short video simply reading "Ready to get excited again," followed by the date of December 9th, or Wednesday this week. Well, I, for one, am very excited, as are many other Israelis. Of course, we've all already been ready to get excited since the first Bereshit, or Genesis lander, crashed into the moon's Sea of Serenity in April 2019, followed then by Space IL's immediate announcement of work towards the Bereshit 2. Though early predictions were that the project would take about 3 years to complete. So this is certainly a welcomed announcement to end a year that has otherwise been filled with some very harsh realities. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be cloudy and cool with lows around 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 degrees Celsius. And then tomorrow you can expect clouds and scattered showers with a slight drop in temperatures for a high of about 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. And now, of course, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. He's very good at exercising, I guess. This is his pre-New Year ambitions, I guess. His before New Year's resolution. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.27 shekels to the American dollar and 2.55 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.